Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the live stream devotion for Thursday, September 24th. And we are, as you should know, working our way through the Gospel of Luke. Today we come to an interesting little bit of scripture. We're going to be looking we are in the 6th chapter. We're going to look at verses 12 to 16. And the heading for this in the NRSV is Jesus chooses the 12 apostles. So we have the choosing of the 12 apostles. Of course, obviously, that's what the header says. But there's more to it there. There's more to consider here. And there's an aspect of this that tends to get completely passed right over because we go right to the flashy stuff, the picking of the 12. So we tend to do that in all things in life, and we can definitely tend to do that in Scripture too. But so let's take a look at the 6th chapter of Luke's Gospel, verses 12 to 16. So I'm going to let Clint grab that before I start to read, so I'm not competing with the phone ringing. All right, let's go. Now during those days he went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. And when day came, he called his disciples and chose 12 of them, whom he also named apostles. Simon, whom he named Peter, his brother Andrew, and James, and John, and Philip, and Bartholomew, and Matthew, and Thomas, and James, son of Alphaeus, and Simon, who was called the Zealot, and Judas, son of James, and Judas Iscariot, who became a traitor. Okay. All right. So we're going to do this as I tend to do sometimes. We're going to deal with the last first and come back to the first last. The first shall be last and the last shall be first. As again, the heading is the choosing of the 12 apostles. So we'll jump right into that, and then we'll back up to the beginning of these verses to verse 12. Here we have the Jesus calling his disciples and choosing 12 of them. Now, 12, of course, is a number that's representative of the 12 tribes. And so that's one of the reasons why the 12 is important. You have different people with different management programs, or Christian management programs put together, and they talk about 12 is a perfect number of people to have under you as far as a second layer of bureaucracy and all of that. I'm not going to get into that. That's a lot of, to some degree that's rationalizing. But for whatever reason, and I think it's most likely because of the 12 tribes, he chooses 12 to be decided or to be described as apostles. Now, apostle means sent. So in reality, many are sent, right? We should be as disciples, as followers, as Christians, we should be accepting that call to be sent. Now, that being sent doesn't necessarily mean you travel hundreds of miles to disseminate the word across the globe, but it can mean that you are taking that word in your own little region. You are sent to that region, to that family even. To the scope within which you are called, that is where you are sent. You're an apostle to that. So let's realize that. Now we have a list of names here. Now one of the things that can make people a little crazy is these lists of names don't necessarily jive from one bit of scripture to the other. You have 4 different lists of disciples in the scripture, and they don't all completely correlate. You got some few names that are different, and then within like the list today, who exactly are these? Well, there is an element of that we're not going to know. But as to the way the names are, one thing you have to remember about names, and it's that way in this world too. It wasn't uncommon, and it isn't uncommon for people to be known by more than one name. For an example, my legal name is William Roy. But if somebody calls me and says, is William there or is Bill there? I know pretty well they don't really know me, because they wouldn't call me William or Roy, or Bill rather. If they didn't know me, they would call me Roy, okay? Because Roy's my middle name. But my son, Creeth, well, okay, his first name is also William, and that's because of our family tree. It always goes 2 names, 2 names, 2 names, going all the way back into Switzerland. So I named my son after myself so that boom, boom, my father was Merle, his father was Merle, My grandfather was Christian, my great-grandfather was Christian, and those names just kept jumping and doubling up all the way back. So I wanted to keep that pattern. But he goes by Creeth within our family. So almost everybody, if I were to say, well, William called, my wife would look at me like, what? Even though it's her son. But in his employment where he works, he's a chef, and he's been a head chef. Now he's a sous chef at a more prestigious restaurant. But he's worked a lot, especially in different jobs, with people of different ethnicities and people that are not native English speakers. Their English is a second language for them, and he discovered pretty early on that for most of those people that English was not their native language. The word or the name Creeth was extremely difficult for them. They couldn't say it. It didn't sound like Creeth, and it was a problem for them. So he began to go by the name William or Will, or even now a lot of the people in the kitchen call him Wilson, and I don't know where that came from. But so you've got 4 different names for one person: Creeth, William, Will, Wilson. And depending on who you were talking to, if I were to talk to some of the people that worked with him in the kitchen, especially the people that are not necessarily native English speakers, and I were to say Creeth, they would look at me like, who are you talking about? And likewise, if they say the name Wilson, it's not going to be automatically registering to me that they're talking about my own son. So, long story short, people can have different names, nicknames, all of that, and so you can have that entering into Scripture. So don't get caught up on the fact, long story short, don't get caught up on the fact that the names might not completely jive, okay? The point we want to make about these names, we'll go through them just a little bit first, and then we'll come back to that point. We have several names in here that may or may not be actually relatives of Jesus. There's potential that there's 3 of Jesus's brothers in this list, actually, which is not normally thought of, but there is the potential there, and I entertain that thought. I don't know that we can know for sure, but Thomas is oftentimes thought to be one of Jesus's brother. Thomas Didymus, the twin, is his nickname. And so we have Thomas, possibly one of Jesus's brothers. Judas, where it says in verse 16, and Judas, son of James. It's Jesus had a brother, Judas or Jude. Again, no, 2 different names for the same person. And he's thought by tradition to be the author of the book of Jude, the epistle of Jude. The son of James there can throw you and go, what do you mean? Well, this guy's the son of James. Well, it's translated Judas, son of James, but in the Greek it's Judas James. There's no of, there's no son, there's no what there. It goes Judas James. And by the inference there is that it would be read Judas of James, not Judas, son of. The son of has been added in there, generally because they think that that's what it's meaning, but it could also mean brother of James. And that would be a perfectly acceptable translation there. Judas, brother of James, and that would be James, thinking that would be James the Just, Jesus's brother. Okay. James, son of Alphaeus, is thought possibly to be James the Just, Jesus's brother. The son of Alphaeus is possible that's a reference. You have to remember when you say someone's a son of, it could be that they're the grandson of, or even the great-grandson of, or even the great-great-grandson of. They're descended of Alphaeus. And so that Alphaeus may be one of the grandfathers or grandparents down the line, or up the line, so to say. So we don't know. And in this list, there's a lot of things we're going to have to accept that we don't know. That's where faith comes into the equation, folks. That these people were chosen out of the many to be focused upon, and we're given this distinction of being called apostles as opposed to just the disciples. Though again, we need to realize that we're all supposed to be sent. That's not just, oh well, it's up to those 12 guys. 13 with Matthias. The other point that we want to make, and the more important point to make, is the diversity of these guys. from top to bottom. Now, if we've got 3 of Jesus' brothers in there, that's interesting. But we've got Matthew in here, Levi, sometimes called Levi. Matthew in here is a tax collector. He's a collaborator with the Roman Empire, or was before he was called. And then you go all the way to Simon, who's called the Zealot. He's he's a member of the Zealots. Now, it's also been proposed, and I think it's probably true, that Judas Iscariot, who became the traitor, was actually a zealot as well. And so you've got a tax collector, a collaborator with the Romans, 2, possibly 1 for certain, zealots, and those guys believed in a violent insurrection against the Romans. So you've pretty much covered the waterfront, folks. And then you've got fishermen thrown in there for good measure, right? And if you've got Jesus' brothers in there, they're skilled craftsmen. They're either carpenters or stoneworkers, probably stoneworkers in that part of the world. We always think of Jesus working as a carpenter, but not a lot of wood over there. Pretty much everything we saw is stone. So probably stoneworkers. So you've got a very diverse group here. Jesus is not picking people because of their particular backgrounds. Now, it's also thought that Judas Iscariot may have been somewhat involved in finance in some way. So, and of course, Matthew definitely was involved in finance, wasn't he? He's a tax collector, for crying out loud. So you've got just a very dynamic and interesting and diverse, again, that's the point that we need to remember, how diverse these guys were from top to bottom. Jesus was picking people from all walks of life and all types, okay? And we don't know the ages. Jesus might have been picking people of various ages, too, as well. We don't know. Chances are very much more so that they're all fairly young, though. But Matthew got to be a tax collector, so he can't be a teen at any rate, you wouldn't think. So, but the other thing, and the final point that we want to make, and the point that we tend to just go right past and not even notice, because we're so excited to get to the list of the apostles, is that verse 12. That's our life application verse out of this, guys and gals. Now, during those days, he went out to the mountain to pray, and he spent the night in prayer to God. Jesus is about to make a big decision, isn't he? He's going to name these 12 disciples, okay? He needs to go out and he needs to connect himself. He needs to be in tune with the desires of God. And how does he go about doing that? What's the motive or the method that he's going about to feel this connection and to answer this call? Well, he spends the entire night in prayer before a big decision. How often do we forget to go and pray? I'm afraid to say it's probably more times than not for most of us. And that's where this verse comes into play. We need to remember that even Jesus, even the creation of God on earth, the divine walking on earth in human form, even he spent the entire night in prayer before making a big decision. So we truly want to model our life and model our activities and model our way of doing things after Jesus. We need to remember that always before we make even small decisions, because sometimes some of the small decisions end up being the big things, aren't they? I've told that story before. Life turns on a dime, so we should be in prayer always. So with that, I'm going to let you all go for today, and have a very blessed, have a very prayerful day. Sit down when we get done and say a prayer for the day. You know what you've got going on. You know the things that you're facing for the day, and pray about those and ask God to bless them. All right. Have a wonderful day. And as always, be a blessing to someone today. And I almost forgot, oh my goodness, we do have drive-through communion tonight because it's Thursday. And don't forget, even though I'm going to be gone the next 2 Thursdays, Terry Waters is going to be coming in and taking that role, as he's the head elder, and he's going to be doing that role of communion. So he'll be on the south side of the church. So come on up and see Terry next week and the week after. All right. Have a blessed day, and please be a blessing to someone today. We'll see y'all later.